3:40 a.m., San Juan Mountains, Colorado. Federal vehicles moved up the private access road at 9,000 feet, running dark with no sirens. The road had been closed to public traffic since 6 the previous evening, under a posted highway-grade maintenance notice. No one questioned it. No one was supposed to be up here at this hour. The target was a boarded alpine lodge sitting empty since April, at the edge of a ski resort being renovated. On paper, the mountain held one employee, a snow-groomer running pre-season road passes. Nothing else. Under that lodge, hidden for 169 days, were 11 women. All American. All adults. The federal vehicles stopped 200 yards short of the structure. Agents from the FBI hostage rescue team and a U.S. Marshals tactical unit moved the rest of the distance on foot through packed snow. The temperature had dropped to 11 degrees by midnight. By 3 a.m., wind off the upper ridge gusted at 18 miles per hour, carrying ice crystals that stung skin and reduced visibility to roughly 40 yards. The agents moved in a staggered column, maintaining interval. Their breath fogged in the quarter moon's light, just enough to read the ground without flashlights. The entry point was a single service door at the back of the housekeeping wing, opening onto a basement laundry block not on any public blueprint. The column had practiced the approach twice in daylight, using a mock-up in the parking lot of the Cortez Municipal Airport. They knew the distance. They knew the grade. They knew where gravel gave way to concrete and where the propane tank sat on the eastern wall. Every agent had reviewed the same overhead imagery, thermal scans, and floor sketch, drawn from memory by a former resort employee. None of that changed what the temperature felt like, or what it meant to move up a mountain in darkness toward a door that might be reinforced, with people inside whose condition was unknown. This is the story of how boot tracks in fresh powder broke a 2-year operation wide open, and what was waiting at the bottom of that mountain. Reuben Vasquez had been grooming snow since he was 24. He was 58 now, a former ski patroller who'd transitioned to contract work after a knee surgery ended his patrol career in 2014. He knew the San Juan Range the way some people know their neighborhood, by memory, by instinct, by how light moved across the snowfields at different hours. He could read a slope in a glance and know whether the overnight refreeze had been hard or soft, whether the wind had packed the ridge or left it sugary, whether the morning melt would start at 9 or 11 depending on cloud cover. That knowledge wasn't something he'd learned and filed away. It was embedded in him after 3 decades at altitude. On the morning of June 24, 2026, Vasquez was running what he called a last pre-mud season pass. The resort's construction crew was scheduled to return in April of the following year. He had a contract to keep the parking aprons and access roads passable through late spring. Fresh overnight powder, less than 2 inches, had settled across the upper lots. Standard work. He'd done it dozens of times. He reached the back of the main lodge at 6:11 a.m. The lodge was boarded. Had been since the previous April. The housekeeping wing's windows were sheeted in plywood, boards weathered gray, and beginning to bow where winter moisture had worked into the grain. The loading dock was padlocked with a heavy shackle hasp showing surface rust, consistent with months of exposure. A folded orange construction notice was stapled to the dock's timber frame, weathered to illegibility, edges curling. Nothing on this side of the building showed any sign of human movement. Vasquez saw the tracks immediately. A single set of boot prints in the fresh overnight skiff, leading from the service door to the propane tank mounted against the eastern wall, then back to the door. The stride was adult, medium weight, unhurried. Someone had walked to that tank, checked or turned something, and walked back inside. The prints were clean at the heel and compressed at the toe. Work boot, not hiking. The depth suggested someone weighing 160 to 180 pounds. No deviation. No hesitation. Whoever made those prints had walked to a specific destination and returned. It was purposeful. The problem, the resort's caretaking agreement didn't cover propane. The construction crew didn't arrive until spring. And the lodge's main heating systems had been winterized and disconnected in October. There was no reason for anyone to check that propane line at 6 in the morning in late June. Vasquez took 12 photographs, time-stamped, from 3 different angles. One parallel to the line of prints showing depth and stride length. One from above showing the path between the door and tank. Close-ups of individual prints showing tread pattern. He worked methodically, moving around the prints without disturbing them, aware that whatever this was, the photographs needed to be precise. Then he called Luis Archuleta, a deputy with the Montezuma County Sheriff's Office he'd known from his patrol years. Vasquez didn't call 911. He called a man he trusted because what he'd seen felt wrong. What Vasquez didn't know, standing in 6 inches of powder behind a shuttered ski lodge, was that those 12 photographs would become federal evidence. The resort itself had a clean history. The Halcyon Ridge Ski Area, a family-owned mid-size alpine operation in southwestern Colorado, had been operating since the 1980s. The current owners, a retired couple based in Phoenix, had announced a 3-season renovation in spring 2025, citing infrastructure needs and a planned expansion of the upper lift system. The closure was publicly documented. Local news had covered it. The permit filings were in order. What was also in order, on the surface, was the company that rented the lodge's basement service facilities. The arrangement had been brokered through a Denver property management intermediary in summer 2025. The paperwork described a storage and operational facility agreement for a regional logistics company. Rent was paid quarterly, in advance, through a shell entity registered in Nevada. The resort's owners, interviewed later by federal investigators, said they'd reviewed the agreement with their attorney and saw nothing unusual. The rent was competitive. The term was short. The logistics company didn't exist in any meaningful sense. It was a registration, an address, a bank account, a phone number that routed to an unchecked voicemail box. The actual operation behind it was something else entirely. Federal investigators later identified the controlling entity as a Denver-fronted placement and au pair agency, operating under the name Meridian Talent and Staffing Solutions. Meridian had maintained storefronts, small, professionally appointed offices with posted business hours and a website in Phoenix, Salt Lake City, and Albuquerque. It had been in operation since spring 2023. On the surface, Meridian offered placement services for domestic workers, models, and personal assistants. It posted on legitimate freelance platforms. It conducted intake interviews. It had a professional LinkedIn presence with 47 followers and a handful of 5-star reviews. What Meridian was actually doing had been constructed carefully over 2 years. By the time federal investigators pulled at its threads, the operation had moved 11 women to a basement in the San Juan Mountains. The court record later described the women as recruited through fraudulent employment offers between August and October 2025. All 11 were American citizens or permanent residents. Their ages ranged from 22 to 36. They came from Phoenix, Tucson, Salt Lake City, Albuquerque, Las Vegas, Denver. Some had responded to posted job listings. Others had been contacted directly through social media. The offers had been specific and credible sounding: domestic placement positions, modeling contracts, personal assistant roles for high net worth clients. None of the offers were real. Before describing what happened to them, it's worth pausing on who they were. Court documents and victim advocates' statements describe 11 individuals who were, by every measure, living recognizable lives before fall 2025. One was a nursing student at the University of New Mexico, 18 months from completing her degree, who'd responded to what appeared to be a legitimate personal assistant, posting because her student loan balance was pressing and the hourly rate mattered. One had been working as a freelance photographer in Salt Lake City, building a portfolio and client list, and had been contacted through her professional Instagram account by someone representing what appeared to be a regional modeling and talent agency. One was a mother of 2 in Phoenix, looking for domestic placement work to supplement income that wasn't covering the gap left by a recent divorce. These weren't abstract victims. They were people with specific lives, specific needs, specific reasons for engaging with an offer that arrived at a specific moment. That specificity wasn't accidental. Investigators who mapped Meridian's recruitment methodology found evidence that the operation had built detailed targeting profiles before making contact. Social media activity, freelance platform profiles, and community board postings had been monitored over weeks before individual outreach. The offers aligned with what each targeted person had publicly expressed needing. The nursing student's posting described flexible hours and remote administrative components. The photographer's contact message referenced her editorial work specifically and named pieces from her portfolio. The mother's offer included a relocation stipend and flexible scheduling around childcare. In each case, the operation had done its homework. The women were taken across a 6-week window in fall 2025. They were moved to the Halcyon Ridge basement in 2 separate box trucks during a controlled burn road closure in mid-November, a period when the mountain access road was legitimately closed to non-authorized traffic. The timing was deliberate. The cover was operational. 169 days passed. I spent time going through the case record, and one detail kept nagging at me: the network's exposure window. For 169 days, 11 women were held in a ski resort basement in southwestern Colorado, while the resort's owners wintered in Phoenix, a construction crew waited in Durango, and a single Snow-Groomer made periodic passes on the access roads. The entire operation rested on the assumption that no one would look at the back of a boarded lodge closely enough to notice. That assumption held for nearly 6 months. Then a man noticed 2 inches of overnight snow and a set of boot prints. Deputy Luis Archuleta received Vasquez's call at 6:22 a.m. He'd known Vasquez for 11 years, trusted his judgment, and understood from the call's tone that this wasn't a routine trespass report. He drove to the resort's service gate, met Vasquez, reviewed the photographs, and made his own call to the FBI's Denver field office duty line at 7:48 a.m. The Denver field office had an active file. This is the part the initial news coverage largely missed. Meridian Talent and Staffing Solutions hadn't come to federal attention through Halcyon Ridge. It had been under preliminary FBI investigation since February 2026, 4 months before Vasquez's call, following a referral from the National Center for Missing and Exploited Adults, which had flagged a cluster of missing person reports from Phoenix and Salt Lake City. 11 women reported missing. Different cities, different demographics, different reporting dates, spread across October and November 2025. No obvious connection. No shared workplaces, no shared social circles, no shared geography beyond the broad Mountain West region. What linked them was a single thread in the missing person reports. 6 of the 11 had referenced, in their last communications to family, a job opportunity with a placement or staffing agency. The descriptions varied. One woman had mentioned a domestic services company. Another had referenced a modeling agency contact. A third had told her sister she'd been offered a personal assistant position for a client in Colorado. An analyst at the FBI's Denver field office named Carla Whitfield had been the one to pull the thread. It took her 3 weeks of cross-referencing intake forms across 4 field offices before a consistent shape emerged. In late January 2026, she formally opened a case file under the Bureau's Human Exploitation Task Force. In February, the file was elevated to full investigation. The problem was that the investigation had stalled. Meridian's storefronts had gone dark. The Phoenix and Salt Lake City offices had been vacated by December. The Albuquerque location closed without notice in January. The registered agent for the Nevada shell entity was a commercial service with no knowledge of the company's operations. The phone numbers went to dead voicemail boxes. The website was taken down. The LinkedIn profile was deleted. The network had gone to ground. By February, investigators had a file, a pattern, 11 names, and no location. What they also had, by late February, was digital evidence that painted a detailed picture of how the operation functioned, even as the location remained unknown. Whitfield's team had subpoenaed records from the 3 freelance platforms where Meridian had posted, obtaining IP address logs, account registration data, and posting histories. Those records showed account creation using VPN services based in Eastern Europe, with session activity concentrated during Mountain Standard Time business hours, consistent with domestic operation but designed to obscure it. Payment records for Meridian's platform accounts showed purchases made through prepaid digital cards purchased at retail locations in Phoenix, Salt Lake City, and Denver between June and August 2025. Investigators mapped those purchases against security camera footage from 6 convenience and grocery stores over 3 weeks, eventually identifying 2 individuals making card purchases who would later be connected to the network. That identification gave investigators names and, briefly, a foothold. By March, both individuals had disappeared. Their last known addresses had been vacated. Neither appeared in financial records after February 15th. The case had a shape but no center. A network diagram with populated nodes and no anchor. The most surprising thing about this case isn't that a sophisticated operation had been constructed in a mountain basement. It's that it nearly wasn't found at all. 3 months of federal investigation had produced a detailed picture of how the network recruited and operated, and 0 operational intelligence on where the victims were being held. The mountain never appeared in a single intercepted communication. The Halcyon Ridge connection had been built through the Nevada Shell Company, itself layered behind 2 intermediary entities. Had Vasquez not made his pass on June 24th, investigators themselves later acknowledged, the timeline for finding that location was measured in months, not days. What happened next moved at a different speed. The Denver field office duty agent who received Archuletta's call at 7:48 a.m. immediately cross-referenced the resort's address against the Nevada Shell Entity database the investigation had assembled. The match came back in under 4 minutes. Halcyon Ridge Ski Area appeared in a property agreement document tied to one of Meridian's sub-entities. The duty agent called Special Agent in Charge Donna Kessler at home at 8:03 a.m. Kessler authorized emergency surveillance deployment by 8:15. By 10 a.m., a multi-agency coordination call had been convened across the FBI's Denver office, the U.S. Marshals Service Rocky Mountain Fugitive Task Force, and the San Juan County and Montezuma County Sheriff's offices. The challenge was immediate. Halcyon Ridge sat at roughly 9,200 feet above sea level, accessible by 1 primary road and 1 secondary service route. A hasty daylight entry risked detection. Anyone monitoring the access road could see vehicle movement from the upper structures. Staged daylight surveillance risked alerting whatever personnel were inside the lodge before tactical entry could be organized. And the tactical question of who, how many, and whether they were armed was completely unknown. There was a second complication. The investigation had developed intelligence suggesting that Meridian's operational network maintained ties to a human smuggling corridor running out of Sonora in northern Mexico, a front-range crew that had provided logistics support for the transport phase. That crew's composition and current location were unknown. The possibility that armed support elements were staged somewhere on or near the mountain couldn't be ruled out. Kessler made the call to hold for nighttime tactical entry. The decision meant the 11 women inside would remain where they were for another 19 hours. It was the right call operationally. It wasn't an easy one. The afternoon and early evening of June 24th weren't idle hours. While the tactical decision held the entry teams in place, investigators ran a parallel track that would prove significant in the hours following the rescue. A financial intelligence team working out of the Denver field office spent the afternoon executing emergency subpoenas against the 4 bank accounts tied to Meridian's shell structure. They found something that introduced urgency beyond the mountain. 2 of the 4 accounts, which held a combined balance of approximately $1.2 million as recently as late May, had been substantially drawn down beginning June 18th, 6 days before Vasquez's call. A total of approximately $800,000 had been moved through intermediary transfers to accounts in 3 jurisdictions. The movement wasn't complete. It was ongoing. That pattern told investigators 2 things. First, the network's principals hadn't been alerted to the specific threat of Vasquez's call. The drawdown had begun 6 days earlier, suggesting either general operational security or some other trigger. Second, someone with access to those accounts was still moving money, which meant someone was still operational, still capable of completing a financial extraction that would make recovery substantially harder. That information shaped the urgency of the simultaneous arrest timeline that would follow the lodge breach. Here's the take that will probably draw argument. The 19-hour hold was correct, and the investigators who made it understood fully what it cost. The alternative, a hasty daylight entry with unknown armed personnel, a single access road, and no interior intelligence, carried risks that could have turned a rescue into something else. The bureaucratic logic and the human math are both visible in the record. They don't cancel each other out. The afternoon of June 24th was used to build the operational picture as completely as possible. Thermal imaging deployed by a Marshals aviation asset at dusk confirmed human presence in the basement level, multiple heat signatures consistent with the number investigators were looking for. The imaging was conducted by a Cessna 208 at an altitude and approach angle calculated to avoid detection from the lodge's upper windows, flying a routing that disguised its surveillance pattern as a standard mountain waypoint transit. The thermal analyst counted heat signatures consistent with 11 to 13 individuals in the basement level. 2 additional signatures were identified on the ground floor of the main lodge, both adult males, both appearing stationary. A 3rd signature was detected in a secondary outbuilding approximately 60 feet from the lodge's eastern wall. External surveillance confirmed 2 individuals moving between the lodge's ground floor and secondary outbuilding. Both were adult males. Neither appeared to be carrying visible weapons, though that assessment was qualified. The operational plan called for simultaneous entry through the housekeeping service door at basement level, with a secondary team covering the lodge's main ground floor exits. The FBI's hostage rescue team, staging out of the Cortez Municipal Airport since early afternoon, would lead the breach. The U.S. Marshals unit would hold the perimeter and cover egress points. The highway-grade maintenance notice had been posted at 6 p.m. the previous evening, closing the resort access road to all non-authorized traffic. No one called to question it. At 3:40 a.m. on June 25th, the column of federal vehicles moved up the access road running dark. The entry team reached the housekeeping service door at 3:51 a.m. Thermal imaging had indicated two armed individuals inside the lodge's ground-level common area, separated from the basement by a locked internal door and a stairwell. The entry plan addressed both simultaneously. At 3:53 a.m., the basement service door was breached. The door had been reinforced from the interior, a steel bar mount added to the original hollow core frame. The breach took 11 seconds. Then the team was through. What they found in the laundry block, a long, low-ceilinged space originally built to house commercial washing and linen pressing equipment, had been modified. The industrial machines had been pushed to one wall. The remaining space had been partitioned using plywood and pre-hung hardware store door frames into smaller enclosures. There were cots, a utility toilet and shower stall behind a curtain partition, a propane-fed space heater, the reason someone had been checking the exterior tank line at 6 in the morning. The modifications were crude but deliberate. Standard 2x4 framing and 3/4-inch plywood sheeting, the kind available at any home improvement retailer. Pre-hung hollow core interior door frames, installed without locks on the interior-facing side. The partitions didn't reach the ceiling. An 18-inch gap ran above each wall, allowing air circulation, but also sound transmission throughout the space. Military surplus folding cots with nylon sleeping pads, a folding table and 2 plastic chairs in the central corridor. A battery-powered lantern hung from a ceiling pipe, supplemented by a single LED strip light running the length of the corridor from a car battery resting on the concrete floor. The propane heater sat at the corridor's far end, a standard contractor-grade unit connected by rubber hose to the exterior tank through a fitting cut into the exterior concrete wall. The fitting was rough but functional. It had kept the space above freezing through a Colorado mountain winter. The 11 women were located in 3 of the enclosures. All were alive. The youngest was 22. The oldest was 36. Court documents noted that several required immediate medical attention upon recovery. A field medical team was on site within 9 minutes of the breach. All 11 were transported by vehicle to Mercy Regional Medical Center in Durango by 6:15 a.m. They had been in that basement for 169 days. The immediate medical assessment identified conditions requiring varying levels of attention. Several women were ambulatory and oriented. Others weren't. The court record's medical annex, partially unsealed in pre-sentencing proceedings, describes findings consistent with prolonged confinement, nutritional deficiency, limited physical activity, and chronic psychological stress. It also notes, without elaboration in the public record, evidence of medical intervention during the period of confinement, findings consistent with the investigation's intelligence about a physician who had visited the site on at least 2 documented occasions. The field team worked quickly, speaking to each woman by name where names were known. The recovery team had been given a list, 11 names, corresponding to the 11 missing persons reports that had started the investigation in January. Agents confirmed identities as they moved through the enclosures. 6 of the 11 were identified by name within the first 4 minutes. The remaining 5 were identified by the time the field medical team had completed its initial assessment. One of the women, identified only by case number, asked an agent within the first 2 minutes whether her daughter was all right. The agent confirmed that family notifications were being arranged. The exchange is noted in the recovery log and nothing further is recorded about it. One detail stayed with me. The women had been reported missing between October and November 2025. In some cases, their families had been searching for nearly 6 months. Court records note that family notification calls were made from Mercy Regional Medical Center, beginning at approximately 7:30 a.m. on June 25th. Those calls are not described in the public record. They don't need to be. The raid apprehended 2 individuals on the ground floor. A third was found in the outbuilding. All 3 were taken into custody without resistance. The 3 individuals taken at the lodge were processed on site before transport to the Montezuma County Detention Facility. During processing, agents recovered 2 handguns, one from a jacket hanging near the internal stairwell door, one from under a mattress in the outbuilding. Both were legally registered in the name of the individual taken in the outbuilding. Both were entered into evidence. No additional weapons were located during the initial scene processing. The ground floor space had been used as a living area. 2 sleeping areas had been created using folded thermal blankets and foam pads on what had been the resort's main lobby floor. A camp stove sat on the lobby's tile counter, near food supplies consistent with extended remote habitation, sealed dry goods, canned items, water containers, and a sealed case of propane canisters. A laptop, a satellite communication device, and 3 cell phones were recovered and logged as evidence. The satellite device was of particular interest. Its usage log was subsequently analyzed for contact patterns and provided several leads in the geographic expansion of the arrest operation. What strikes us about this case is the infrastructure it required to stay hidden. A 2-year recruitment operation, multiple storefronts in 3 cities, a shell entity, a sub-entity, a registered agent, a property agreement, box trucks, a controlled burn road closure, a basement laundry block modified with plywood and propane, a physician who visited twice and was paid in cash. The operational footprint was, paradoxically, enormous, and it was still nearly invisible. Not because it was sophisticated beyond detection, but because it occupied a space that no one was supposed to look at. A closed resort, a vacant mountain, a building that wasn't supposed to be alive. The 2 hours following the lodge entry were used to process the 3 individuals in custody and begin the geographic expansion of the arrest operation. The investigation had spent 4 months building the network map. By the time the lodge was breached, the FBI and Marshals had arrest documentation ready for 7 individuals across 3 states. The tactical decision had been made to hold all arrest operations until the lodge entry was confirmed successful. Simultaneous execution would prevent the network from receiving warning before the primary rescue was complete. At 4:05 a.m., 40 minutes after the lodge breach, arrest teams activated across Colorado, Arizona, and New Mexico. The 2 principals of Meridian Talent and Staffing Solutions were taken into custody in Denver and Scottsdale, respectively. The Denver arrest came at 4:12 a.m. at a residence in the 5 Points neighborhood. The subject was asleep when agents made entry and offered no resistance. The Scottsdale arrest came at 4:08 a.m., coordinated with the FBI's Phoenix field office. Both were taken without incident. 4 handlers, individuals identified as directly managing the transport and containment operation, were arrested in 2 separate operations over the following 48 hours. One was located in Albuquerque. One was in Colorado Springs. 2 were taken in a coordinated operation at a motel near Farmington, New Mexico on the morning of June 26th. The Farmington arrests were the most operationally complex of the post-rescue sweep. The 2 individuals had been sharing a room on the 2nd floor of an extended stay property. One of them, seeing federal vehicles in the parking lot through a window curtain, exited through a rear stairwell and made it approximately 200 yards across an adjacent commercial parking lot before being taken to the ground by a Marshals team staged on the secondary perimeter. He wasn't injured. Neither was the agent who stopped him. The physician, identified in the indictment as a licensed physician practicing in the Denver metro area with no prior criminal record, was arrested at his practice in Wheat Ridge, Colorado, at 7:15 a.m. on June 25th. The arrest came less than 4 hours after the lodge breach. He hadn't yet been informed that the lodge had been found. The physician's arrest had been coordinated carefully. Investigators had identified him through a combination of the satellite device usage log, a payment record subpoenaed from a cash advance financial service, and a vehicle registration that had appeared twice in historical imagery of the mountain access road, taken during a routine aerial survey conducted for unrelated purposes by the Colorado Department of Transportation. The convergence of 3 independent data points, none definitive on its own, had been sufficient to name him as a person of interest by late March. By May, investigators had developed probable cause. The arrest warrant had been signed and held, waiting for the lodge entry to be confirmed. He was sitting at his desk reviewing patient files when agents entered through the practice's staff entrance. He looked up, recognized immediately what was happening, and asked to call his attorney. The request was granted. He said nothing further. 7 arrests in 48 hours. Charges across the 7 defendants included conspiracy to commit forced labor, unlawful transportation, illegal detention, and multiple counts of conspiracy. The physician faced additional charges related to providing medical services under conditions constituting facilitation of the underlying offenses. The total number of individuals charged in the initial indictment was 7. Federal prosecutors later indicated that the investigation remained open and that additional charges were anticipated. Here's where the roughness in this case becomes important. The Sonora Corridor connection, the Front Range logistics crew that investigators believed had provided transport support, wasn't fully resolved in the initial arrests. 3 individuals identified in the federal indictment as material persons of interest weren't in custody as of the filing date. Their locations were described in court documents as unknown. Federal warrants had been issued. One of those 3 was believed to have left the country before the arrests were executed. The specific destination wasn't named in the public record. The warrant remained active. What doesn't appear in any public filing is a complete accounting of the financial architecture that supported the operation. The investigation identified 4 separate bank accounts tied to Meridian's shell structure. Of those 4, 2 had been substantially drawn down in the weeks before the arrest. A total of approximately $800,000 moved through intermediary accounts and not recovered. Where that money went and who ultimately controlled those accounts was still under investigation, as of the initial indictment. The Halcyon Ridge Resort's owners, the retired couple in Phoenix, were interviewed by federal investigators. They weren't named as subjects of the investigation. The property management intermediary who had brokered the storage agreement on behalf of the Nevada shell entity was separately investigated. As of this account, no charges had been filed against that individual, but the investigation into their knowledge of the arrangement was described by prosecutors as ongoing. And then there is the operational question that the case record doesn't fully answer. The intelligence that had allowed Meridian to stay ahead of the February investigation for 4 months, the network that had gone dark precisely as the FBI's Denver field office elevated its file, suggested either exceptional operational security or some form of warning. The court record doesn't address this directly. Federal investigators acknowledged in background briefings, without specificity, that the question of how Meridian's principals knew to close their storefronts in December and January was a subject of ongoing inquiry. Whether that inquiry will produce answers, and whether those answers will lead to additional defendants, is unknown. What is known is the timeline. A cluster of missing person reports filed in fall 2025. An FBI analyst who noticed a pattern in January. A stalled investigation that hit a wall. A Snow-Groomer's pre-dawn pass on a mountain access road. 12 photographs. a call to a deputy at 6:22 a.m., and a basement door breached at 3:53 on the morning of June 25, 2026. Reuben Vasquez, the Snow-Groomer who initiated the chain of events that led to the rescue, gave a brief statement to the Cortez Journal 4 days after the raid. He said he'd done nothing unusual. He'd seen something that didn't add up. He'd called someone he trusted. "I just knew the mountain wasn't supposed to have anybody on it," he told the paper. "You spend 30-some years on a mountain. You know when something's wrong." He didn't elaborate, and the reporter didn't push. The statement runs 4 sentences in the paper's print edition. There is a photograph of Vasquez standing at the service gate of the resort, hands in the pockets of a canvas work jacket, looking not at the camera but at the mountain behind it. The caption identifies him by name and occupation. The article ran on page 3. The 7 defendants face federal charges that carry substantial sentencing ranges. Pre-trial proceedings were ongoing as of this account. No plea agreements had been publicly announced. The 11 women were treated at Mercy Regional Medical Center and later transferred or released as appropriate to their individual situations. Their names haven't been released publicly. Their families were notified on the morning of June 25th. The Halcyon Ridge Ski Area remains closed. The resort's owners haven't made public statements about the property's future. The access road, parking aprons, and boarded main lodge remain as they were the morning Vasquez ran his final pass. The laundry block in the basement has been photographed, documented, and preserved as a federal crime scene. It will remain sealed until the legal proceedings conclude. 3 individuals connected to the logistics tier of the operation remain at large. The money that moved through those 4 accounts in the weeks before the arrest hasn't been found. The question of how Meridian's principals knew to go dark in December and January hasn't been publicly answered. The network was dismantled. The infrastructure it used, the shell companies, storefronts, rental agreements, anonymous logistics pipeline, none of it was unique to this operation. All of it was available to anyone willing to use it the same way. The demand that built Meridian talent and staffing solutions existed before it opened its first storefront in Phoenix. It exists now. If something about this case doesn't sit right, the question that keeps surfacing in the record and doesn't resolve cleanly, it's the 4 months between when investigators knew something had happened and when the basement was found. 4 months is a long time. The investigation moved correctly within its constraints. The analyst who built the pattern, the agents who assembled the network map, the tactical teams who executed without a mistake, the operational record isn't in question. What the record shows, without editorial, is that a 2-year operation ran almost entirely undetected until a man checked boot tracks in 2 inches of fresh powder on a mountain that was supposed to be empty. 1 set of prints, going to a propane tank, and back. That was the crack. Everything else followed.